What if the most watched woman in the world could become completely invisible for just one day? What if behind the palace gates, away from the flashing cameras and protocol, a mother's simple wish to give her children one ordinary Christmas memory could lead to the most extraordinary adventure of their lives? This is not a fairy tale. This is not about tiaras or state dinners. This is about a woman who happens to be a princess, but, first and foremost, is a mother, who dared to break every rule in the royal handbook for the sake of her children's happiness. In a world where every breath is documented and every smile is analyzed, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, managed to orchestrate something that seemed impossible. She disappeared. Not in the way that creates scandals or headlines, but, in the most beautiful way possible, she became just another mother on Christmas morning, taking her youngest children on an adventure that no one saw coming. This is the story of 24 hours that changed everything. 24 hours where protocol was forgotten, where security scrambled, where two young royals discovered what it truly meant to be free, and where their mother proved that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the greatest acts of rebellion. Are you ready to discover what really happened during those missing hours? Are you prepared to see the royal family as you've never seen them before? This is their story. This is their secret. This is their Christmas miracle. The December morning mist hung low over Windsor Castle as Catherine walked through the ancient corridors, her silk slippers making barely a whisper against the stone floors. Christmas was just 3 days away, and the castle buzzed with its usual pre-holiday energy. Staff members hurried past carrying silver trays laden with crystal glasses, preparing for another elaborate royal celebration that would be photographed, analyzed, and discussed by millions around the world. But Catherine's mind was elsewhere entirely. She paused at a tall window overlooking the grounds, watching as gardeners arranged pristine topiaries that would serve as backdrops for official Christmas photographs. Everything was perfect, as always. Everything was planned, as always. Everything was exactly as the public expected it to be. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and closed her eyes. In just a few hours, she would need to transform into the Princess of Wales again, the woman in designer gowns who smiled graciously at state dinners and made speeches about charitable causes. But, right now, in this quiet moment before dawn, she was simply Catherine. Simply a mother who had been awake since 4 a.m, thinking about her children. The sound of small feet padding down the hallway broke her reverie. She turned to see Princess Charlotte, still in her nightgown, rubbing sleepy eyes with tiny fists. Behind her, Prince Louis dragged his stuffed lion along the floor, leaving a trail across the Persian rugs that probably cost more than most people's homes. "Mommy?" Charlotte's voice was soft and uncertain. "Are we doing the Christmas photos today?" Catherine knelt down to her daughter's level, smoothing the little girl's sleep-tousled hair. At 7 years old, Charlotte was already beginning to understand the weight of their public life. She had learned to smile on command, to wave at the right moment, to stand perfectly still while photographers captured every angle. It was a skill that came with their birthright, but it was also a burden that Catherine never wanted her children to carry alone. "Not today, sweetheart," Catherine whispered, pulling both children close. "Today is just for us." Louis, at 4 years old, was blissfully unaware of most royal protocols. He climbed into his mother's lap without ceremony, his lion tucked securely under one arm. "Can we have pancakes?" he asked, as if this were any ordinary morning in any ordinary home. "We can have whatever you want," Catherine said, and, for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to freedom stirring in her chest. The truth was, Catherine had been planning this day for months. She had watched her children navigate their royal duties with remarkable grace for their ages, but she had also seen the moments when the cameras weren't rolling. She had seen Charlotte practice her curtsy in her bedroom mirror, repeating the movement until it was perfect. She had watched Louis ask why he couldn't just run and play like other children when they attended public events. She had seen the way they both looked longingly at families in parks, families who could be silly and spontaneous without worrying about who might be watching. As the Princess of Wales, Catherine knew the importance of duty, of tradition, of maintaining the dignity of the crown. But, as a mother, she knew something else entirely. She knew that her children deserved to experience childhood magic without the weight of a nation watching their every move. The plan had started as a simple thought during a particularly formal dinner party. She had been making polite conversation about Christmas traditions when she realized that her own children's Christmas memories would be filled with protocol and procedure rather than genuine joy and discovery. That night, lying in bed beside William, she had made a decision that would have terrified her security detail and horrified palace officials if they had known about it. She was going to give her children one perfectly ordinary Christmas adventure. The logistics had taken weeks to arrange. Catherine had learned to navigate royal security protocols better than most, and she understood exactly where the gaps were. She knew the shift changes, the blind spots, the moments when attention was focused elsewhere. Most importantly, she knew that sometimes the best way to hide was in plain sight. Now, holding her children in the pre-dawn quiet of Windsor Castle, Catherine felt the familiar flutter of nervous excitement. She had spent months planning every detail of what she privately called Operation Ordinary Christmas, and today was the day everything would either work perfectly or fall apart spectacularly. "Mommy?" Charlotte was looking at her with the sort of intuitive wisdom that children sometimes possessed. "Are we going somewhere special today?" Catherine smiled, the kind of genuine smile that rarely appeared in official photographs. "We're going on an adventure, my darling. But it's our secret adventure." "Can you and Louis keep a very special secret?" Both children nodded solemnly, sensing the importance of their mother's words without fully understanding them. "Good," Catherine said, standing up and taking each child by the hand. "Then, let's start our day." They made their way to the private family kitchen, a much smaller and more intimate space than the grand kitchens where elaborate state dinners were prepared. Catherine had specifically requested that this area be off-limits to staff for the morning, claiming she wanted to prepare a special breakfast for the children herself. It wasn't entirely a lie, she did intend to make breakfast. But it was also the beginning of her carefully orchestrated plan. As she scrambled eggs and toasted bread, Catherine felt a sense of normalcy that was rare in her daily life. Charlotte helped set the table with mismatched plates they had found in a back cupboard, while Louis arranged his collection of toy cars around his place setting. They were just a family having breakfast together, something millions of people did every morning without thinking twice about it. But, for the Princess of Wales and her children, this simple act felt revolutionary. After breakfast, Catherine announced, flipping pancakes with perhaps more enthusiasm than the task required, "We're going to do something very special. Something we've never done before." "What is it?" Louis bounced in his chair, syrup already sticky on his fingers. Catherine looked at her children, these two small people who carried the weight of royal expectation simply by being born into their family. They deserved to experience the world beyond castle walls and security details. They deserved to discover who they were when nobody was watching and expectations didn't exist. "We're going to disappear," she said simply. Charlotte tilted her head, confused but intrigued. "Like magic?" "Better than magic," Catherine replied. "Like being normal." The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, one of the most recognizable women in the world, planning to spend the day being unrecognizable. She had studied ordinary mothers, observing how they moved through the world with their children. She had practiced different ways of styling her hair, different clothes that would help her blend into crowds rather than stand out from them. She had even learned to change her posture, her voice, her entire presence. After breakfast, Catherine led the children to a rarely used bedroom in the castle's east wing. Hidden in the back of an antique wardrobe were 3 sets of clothes that looked nothing like the designer outfits the royal family typically wore. Simple jeans, warm sweaters, practical boots, the kind of clothes that wouldn't merit a second glance in any crowd. "We're playing dress up?" Louis asked, examining a blue sweater that looked remarkably ordinary. "Something like that," Catherine said, helping him into the unfamiliar clothes. She had purchased everything in common brands from ordinary stores, the kind of places where regular families shopped for their children. Everything was comfortable, practical, and completely unremarkable. When they were all changed, Catherine looked at their reflection in an old mirror. Charlotte's usually perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Louis wore clothes that any 4-year-old might wear to the park. And Catherine herself had transformed from the polished Princess of Wales into someone who could easily be mistaken for any other mother spending the day with her children. The transformation was more than just clothing. It was a complete shift in how they held themselves, how they moved, how they existed in space. For the first time in years, Catherine felt invisible in the best possible way. Now, she said, checking her watch, comes the really exciting part. She had timed everything perfectly. The staff shift change happened at 9 in the morning, creating a 20-minute window when security attention was focused on briefings rather than monitoring. The castle's delivery entrance, normally used for bringing in supplies, would be temporarily unstaffed as guards rotated positions. It was a narrow window of opportunity, but Catherine had practiced the timing dozens of times. Most importantly, she had arranged for what appeared to be a routine grocery delivery. The van would arrive precisely at 9:15, driven by someone Catherine trusted completely, her longtime friend Sarah, who had been helping with the secret planning for weeks. "Are you ready for our adventure?" Catherine asked, taking her children's hands. Charlotte squeezed her mother's fingers. "I'm ready, Mummy." Louis nodded enthusiastically, clutching his stuffed lion. "Where are we going?" Catherine smiled, leading them toward the rarely used back staircase that would take them to the delivery entrance. "We're going to discover what Christmas feels like when nobody knows who we are." The corridor seemed longer than usual as they walked toward their escape route. Catherine's heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and terror. She was about to take two of the most protected children in the world completely off the radar. She was about to break every security protocol that had been put in place to keep her family safe. She was about to give her children something that no amount of royal privilege could provide, the freedom to be completely ordinary. As they reached the door that would lead them to their adventure, Catherine paused. Once they stepped through that door, there would be no turning back. They would be on their own in a way that the royal family never was. No security detail, no backup plan, no safety net except her own careful planning and determination. She looked down at Charlotte and Louis, both of them trusting her completely, both of them excited about their mysterious adventure. In their eyes, she saw the reflection of the mother she had always wanted to be, not the Princess of Wales, not a public figure, just their mummy taking them somewhere special. "Ready," she whispered. They nodded together, and Catherine pushed open the door to the most extraordinary ordinary day of their lives. The delivery van idled quietly behind the castle's service entrance, its ordinary appearance making it nearly invisible among the morning's routine activities. Sarah sat behind the wheel, her fingers drumming nervously against the steering wheel as she watched the clock on the dashboard. 27 years of friendship with Catherine had taught her to expect the unexpected, but nothing had prepared her for this particular request. Sarah had known Catherine since university, long before she became the Princess of Wales, back when she was simply Kate Middleton who sometimes borrowed Sarah's notes for art history lectures. They had remained friends through Catherine's transformation into royal life, though their friendship had necessarily become more private and carefully managed. When Catherine had called 6 weeks ago with what she described as an unusual favor, Sarah had assumed it would involve some discreet shopping or perhaps helping with a surprise for William. She certainly hadn't expected to become an accomplice in what amounted to a royal disappearing act. The side door of the castle opened so quietly that Sarah almost missed it. 3 figures emerged, moving quickly but calmly across the small courtyard. For a moment, Sarah didn't recognize her oldest friend. Gone was the elegant Princess of Wales with her signature bouncing curls and designer coats. In her place was a woman in dark jeans and a navy wool coat, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, looking exactly like any other mother running errands with her children. Catherine opened the van's sliding door and helped Charlotte and Louis climb inside. The children seemed excited rather than nervous, chattering quietly to each other as they settled into the back seats. Sarah had installed proper car seats earlier that morning, following Catherine's precise specifications about safety requirements that couldn't be compromised even during their secret adventure. "Hello, Aunt Sarah," Charlotte whispered, using the honorary title she had given Sarah years ago. "Hi, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her voice slightly shaky with nerves. "Are you excited about your special day?" "Mummy says we're going to be invisible," Louis announced proudly, holding up his stuffed lion. "Like superheroes?" Catherine climbed into the passenger seat, and, for a moment Sarah saw something in her friend's expression that took her back to their university days, that particular combination of mischief and determination that had always meant Catherine was planning something memorable. Thank you for this, Catherine said quietly, fastening her seatbelt. I know it's completely mad. Mad is putting it mildly, Sarah replied, pulling away from the castle with deliberate casualness. When palace security realizes the Princess of Wales and 2 royal children have vanished, I'm fairly certain they'll have my head. They won't realize anything is wrong for hours, Catherine said with confidence that surprised even herself. I've scheduled a morning of private time with the children. As far as anyone knows, we're having a quiet family morning in the private quarters. My protection officer thinks I'm reading stories in the nursery until noon. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror at Charlotte and Louis, who were pressed against the windows watching the countryside roll past. And, what exactly happens at noon when they discover you're not actually reading stories in the nursery? Catherine's smile was mysterious. By noon, we'll already have had the most wonderful morning of our lives, and we'll be safely back where we belong. The plan was beautifully simple in its audacity. Sarah would drive them to Marlborough, a market town about 45 minutes from Windsor. It was far enough away that Catherine was unlikely to be recognized by anyone with close royal connections, but close enough that they could return quickly if needed. Most importantly, Marlborough was having its annual Christmas market that day, exactly the sort of normal, festive activity that Charlotte and Louis had never been able to experience without crowds of photographers and curious onlookers. As they drove through the Wiltshire countryside, Catherine felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in over a decade. The landscape looked different somehow when viewed from the passenger seat of an ordinary van rather than through the bulletproof windows of a royal convoy. Everything seemed more immediate, more real, more alive. Mummy, Charlotte said from the back seat, nobody knows where we are right now, do they? Nobody except Aunt Sarah, Catherine confirmed. Just us. The concept seemed to fascinate Charlotte, who had spent her entire life surrounded by people whose job it was to know exactly where she was at every moment. What does that feel like? Catherine considered the question seriously. It feels like flying, she said finally. Like we could go anywhere and be anyone. Louis was less interested in the philosophical implications of their adventure and more focused on the immediate excitement. Are there going to be toys at the Christmas market? I suspect there might be, Sarah said, catching Catherine's eye. They had planned for this possibility. Catherine had brought a small amount of cash, something she rarely carried, and had prepared herself for the novel experience of actually purchasing things for her children rather than having gifts selected, purchased, and wrapped by staff. As they approached Marlborough, Catherine felt her nerves beginning to heighten. This was the real test. For the past hour, they had been safely contained within the van, invisible to the outside world. But now they would need to actually interact with people, to blend into crowds, to be normal in a way that Catherine hadn't attempted since before her engagement to William. Remember, Catherine said, turning to face her children, today we're just a normal family enjoying the Christmas market. That means no curtsying, no formal manners, and definitely no mentioning anything about castles or palaces. Charlotte nodded seriously. What should we say if someone asks about where we live? Catherine had coached them on this. We live in the countryside near London. And our names are Kate, Charlotte, and Louis. Nothing else. She had chosen to use her original name rather than create completely false identities. It felt safer somehow, more honest. If someone recognized her voice or mannerisms, hearing the name Kate wouldn't immediately trigger royal associations the way Catherine might. The market square in Marlborough was exactly what Catherine had hoped for. Dozens of wooden stalls were arranged around the historic market cross, selling everything from handmade crafts to hot chestnuts. Families wandered between the stalls, children clutching paper cups of hot chocolate, parents carrying bags filled with Christmas gifts. Christmas carols played from speakers hidden among the decorations, and the air smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke. Sarah parked in a municipal car park several blocks away, and Catherine felt another small thrill at the mundane act of walking to their destination rather than being delivered directly to it by a royal convoy. Stay close, Catherine reminded her children as they approached the market, but feel free to look at everything. The first few minutes were the most nerve-wracking. Catherine found herself hyper-aware of every glance, every conversation, every person who might notice something familiar about her face or voice. But, gradually, she realized that her careful preparation had worked. Dressed in ordinary clothes, moving with the casual energy of any other mother, she was successfully invisible. The revelation was intoxicating. Charlotte was the first to fully embrace their newfound anonymity. At a stall selling handmade jewelry, she spent 15 minutes examining different friendship bracelets, chatting easily with the elderly woman behind the counter about which colors were prettiest. There were no photographers capturing her sweet interaction with a local craftsperson. No commentators analyzing her choice of accessories for hidden meanings. She was simply a 7-year-old girl enjoying beautiful things. Louis was enchanted by a puppet show that was being performed in one corner of the square. He sat on the ground with a dozen other children, laughing at the silly characters and calling out suggestions when the puppeteer asked for audience participation. Catherine watched from nearby, marveling at how naturally he interacted with the other children when there were no protocols to follow and no adults reminding him of proper behavior. For the first time, Catherine saw her children as the outside world might see them, not as young royals carrying the weight of tradition and expectation, but simply as delightful, curious, normal children. "They're lovely," said a woman standing next to Catherine, both of them watching the puppet show. "How old are yours?" The simple question took Catherine by surprise. When was the last time someone had asked her about her children without knowing exactly who they were? When was the last time she had been able to answer as just another mother? 7 and 4, Catherine replied, amazed at how normal the conversation felt. "They're fascinated by the puppets." "Mine too," the woman laughed. "We come every year. It's become our Christmas tradition." Christmas tradition. The phrase hit Catherine with unexpected force. Here were families creating their own traditions, simple and personal and meaningful in ways that had nothing to do with centuries of royal protocol. Watching the puppet show had become this family's Christmas tradition. Not because it was historically significant or symbolically important, but simply because it brought them joy. When the puppet show ended, Catherine found herself in the unusual position of needing to decide what to do next. For most of her adult life, her schedule had been planned by others, her activities carefully coordinated and timed. But, here in the market square, she had the strange luxury of choice. "What would you like to see next?" she asked her children. Charlotte pointed toward a stall selling Christmas ornaments. "Can we look at the decorations?" "Of course," Catherine said, and they wandered over together. The ornament stall was run by a young couple with paint-stained aprons who clearly made their wares by hand. Their decorations were nothing like the elaborate, historically significant ornaments that decorated the royal family's Christmas trees. These were simple, cheerful, obviously made with love rather than perfection in mind. Louis was immediately drawn to a collection of painted wooden animals. "Look, Mummy! There's a lion like mine." The wooden lion ornament was charmingly imperfect, with slightly uneven stripes and one ear that was larger than the other. It would never have met the standards for royal Christmas decorations, but Catherine found it absolutely perfect. "Would you like to have it?" she asked Louis. His eyes lit up. "Really? I can choose my own Christmas ornament?" The question revealed something Catherine hadn't fully realized before. Her children had never been allowed to choose their own anything when it came to Christmas. Their stockings were filled by staff members following traditional guidelines. Their gifts were selected based on educational value and appropriate royal image. Even their Christmas wishes were carefully managed to ensure they aligned with family values and public expectations. But, here, in this ordinary market stall, Louis could choose his own imperfect wooden lion simply because he loved it. "Of course you can choose," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion she hoped wasn't noticeable. "Charlotte, would you like to choose something too?" Charlotte examined the ornaments with serious concentration before selecting a painted star with slightly wobbly points and a cheerful yellow face. It was exactly the sort of thing a 7-year-old would love and exactly the sort of thing that would never appear on a royal Christmas tree. As Catherine paid for the ornaments with actual money from her own purse, another novel experience, she realized that her children were creating their first independent Christmas memories. Not memories that would be documented in official photographs or discussed in royal biographies, but private, personal memories that belonged only to them. "Thank you," Charlotte said to the young woman behind the counter, and Catherine noticed that her daughter's thank you was different somehow. More natural and less formal than her usual carefully taught manners. She was just a child being polite because she felt grateful, not because protocol demanded it. They spent the next hour wandering freely through the market. Catherine bought them hot chocolate from a cart run by teenagers who flirted harmlessly with each other between customers. They listened to Christmas carols performed by a local church choir. They watched a glass-blowing demonstration where Louis asked 100 questions and Charlotte carefully observed every technique. At a bookstall, Charlotte discovered a series about a young detective that she had never heard of before. In their usual life, her reading material was carefully selected by tutors and approved by educational advisors. But here, she could simply browse and choose based on what caught her interest. "These look exciting," she told the bookseller, a kind older man with wire-rimmed glasses. "Oh, they're brilliant," he assured her. "My granddaughter is about your age and she's absolutely mad about them. You'll love the puzzles in each story." Catherine bought the entire series, knowing that these books would become treasured precisely because Charlotte had discovered them herself rather than having them selected for her educational benefit. As the morning progressed, Catherine began to understand something fundamental about what she had given her children today. It wasn't just freedom from cameras and protocols. It was the gift of agency, the ability to make choices, express preferences, and interact with the world on their own terms. When Louis decided he was hungry, they bought meat pies from a food stall and ate them standing up in the square, talking to other families doing exactly the same thing. When Charlotte wanted to watch the Morris dancers who had begun performing near the market cross, they found a spot on a bench and stayed as long as she wanted. Nobody rushed them. Nobody had a schedule to keep. Nobody was waiting for them to move on to the next planned activity. For 2 hours, they were simply a family enjoying a Christmas market together, creating exactly the sort of spontaneous, unplanned memories that Catherine had always imagined other families took for granted. It was, Catherine realized, the most perfect morning she had ever spent with her children. As the church bells chimed 11 o'clock, Catherine felt the first stirring of anxiety about their timeline. She had carefully calculated every aspect of their adventure, and they needed to begin thinking about heading back soon. But, as she watched Louis feeding crumbs to a family of ducks by the small pond at the edge of the market square, she found it almost impossible to imagine ending this perfect morning. Charlotte had made friends with a girl roughly her own age whose family was visiting from Bath. The two children were comparing their newly purchased books and discussing their favorite Christmas traditions with the easy intimacy that children could achieve in minutes. Catherine overheard Charlotte describing their morning in terms that revealed just how extraordinary this ordinary experience had been for her. "We walked everywhere," Charlotte was telling her new friend with obvious pride. "And my mummy let us choose whatever we wanted to look at. And we didn't have to wait for anyone or ask permission or anything." The innocence of the statement struck Catherine profoundly. Charlotte was describing basic childhood autonomy as if it were a special privilege, which, Catherine realized with a pang of guilt, it essentially was in their usual life. Sarah appeared beside Catherine, having spent the morning discreetly following at a distance while the family explored the market. "How are we doing on time?" she asked quietly. Catherine checked her watch. "We should probably start heading back soon," she admitted reluctantly. "But I'm not sure I'm ready for this to end." "The children seem to be having the time of their lives," Sarah observed, watching as Louis attempted to convince a particularly bold duck to take food directly from his hand. "That's what makes it so hard," Catherine said. "I'm not sure I've ever seen them this relaxed and happy. They're just being children. Real children, not royal children." A commotion near the market entrance caught their attention. A black SUV had pulled up, and Catherine's heart lurched as she recognized the type of vehicle used by palace security. For a moment, she was certain their adventure had been discovered, that their perfect morning was about to end with a very awkward conversation with protection officers. But the SUV disgorged not security personnel but another ordinary family carrying shopping bags and looking excited about their market visit. Catherine realized that her months of royal life had made her paranoid about perfectly normal things. Not every black vehicle was connected to palace security. Not every unexpected arrival was related to her family. The realization made her laugh, which in turn made Charlotte look over with curiosity. "What's funny, Mummy?" "I was just thinking about how different everything looks when you're not expecting to be recognized," Catherine said, which was true enough. Charlotte considered this thoughtfully. "Nobody here knows we're royal, do they?" "Nobody," Catherine confirmed. "To them, we're just Kate and Charlotte and Louis having a day out together." "I like being just Charlotte," her daughter said simply, and Catherine felt her heart break a little bit. Not because Charlotte was unhappy with her royal life, but because her young daughter had already learned to distinguish between being herself and being her public self. Louis returned from his duck-feeding expedition with muddy shoes and a huge grin. "The ducks liked the bread," he announced. And one of them had babies that were swimming in a line behind her. His excitement was infectious and completely unguarded in a way that was rare during their public appearances. Catherine realized that even at 4 years old, Louis had already begun to modulate his natural enthusiasm during official events. But, here, with no cameras and no expectations, he was purely himself. "Should we walk through the market one more time before we go?" Catherine suggested, not quite ready to leave but knowing they needed to begin moving toward their departure. They took a leisurely final stroll through the stalls, and Catherine noticed details she had missed during their first exploration. The way families moved together, naturally and without consideration for who might be watching. The easy conversations between strangers brought together by shared interest in a craft or a book or a piece of music. The children who ran between stalls without security concerns or protocol considerations. At a small cafe tucked into one corner of the square, they stopped for a final hot chocolate. Catherine had never sat at a cafe table without advanced security sweeps and carefully planned seating arrangements. The simple act of choosing a table near the window because it had a nice view felt revolutionary. "This has been the best day ever," Louis declared, chocolate mustache evident despite Catherine's attempts to keep his face clean. "Why?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious about his perspective on their adventure. Louis thought seriously about the question. "Because nobody told us what to do," he said finally. "We just did what we wanted to do." Charlotte nodded in agreement. "And nobody took pictures of us doing it." Their answers revealed something Catherine had suspected but hadn't fully articulated. Her children's usual experience of special occasions involved being watched, documented, and directed. Today had been special precisely because it lacked all of those elements. As they finished their hot chocolate and prepared to leave, a young mother at the neighboring table leaned over with a friendly smile. "Excuse me," she said to Catherine, "I just wanted to say your children are absolutely lovely. So well-behaved and polite." Catherine felt a flush of genuine pride that had nothing to do with royal training or public image. "Thank you," she replied. "That's very kind of you to say." "My little one is the same age as your son," the woman continued, gesturing toward a boy who was building elaborate structures with sugar packets. "It's nice to see children who still have such natural curiosity about everything." The casual conversation between mothers was exactly the sort of interaction Catherine had imagined but rarely experienced. Here was someone commenting on her children not because they were royal but simply because they were delightful children being themselves. After saying goodbye to their cafe companions, they walked slowly back toward the car park where Sarah was waiting. Catherine found herself memorizing details she wanted to preserve, the way Charlotte skipped while carrying her bag of books, the careful attention Louis paid to not stepping on sidewalk cracks, the feeling of walking at their own pace without anyone hurrying them along to the next scheduled appearance. "Mummy," Charlotte said as they reached Sarah's van, "can we do this again sometime?" The question was innocent and natural, but it highlighted the complexity of what Catherine had orchestrated. This wasn't the sort of adventure that could be repeated easily or regularly. It had required months of planning, careful timing, and considerable risk. Most importantly, it had worked today partly because it was unexpected. Security protocols existed for good reasons, and circumventing them repeatedly would eventually become impossible. "We'll see," Catherine said, which was the same answer parents everywhere gave when they couldn't promise something but didn't want to disappoint their children. Today was special partly because it was a surprise. As they drove back toward Windsor, Catherine reflected on what they had accomplished during their few hours of freedom. They had proven that her children could navigate the ordinary world with grace and kindness. They had demonstrated that royal training and natural good manners could coexist with spontaneous joy and authentic curiosity. Most importantly, they had created memories that belonged entirely to their family, with no public dimension or official significance. But Catherine also recognized that their adventure had highlighted the limitations of their usual life in ways that were both enlightening and somewhat troubling. Charlotte and Louis had been so delighted by basic childhood freedoms that their excitement revealed how constrained their normal experiences were. "Did you have fun today, Aunt Sarah?" Louis asked from the back seat, ever concerned about including everyone in his happiness. "I had a wonderful time watching you three explore the market," Sarah replied honestly. "You were all perfect adventurers." Charlotte was already looking through one of her new books, but she glanced up to add, "It was different than our usual adventures, wasn't it, Mummy?" "Very different," Catherine agreed. "What did you like best about it being different?" "Nobody knew what we were supposed to do," Charlotte said thoughtfully. "So we just did what we wanted to do." The insight was remarkably sophisticated for a 7-year-old, and it made Catherine realize that her daughter was already quite aware of the expectations and constraints that came with their public roles. Charlotte understood that their usual activities involved performing their family identity for others rather than simply living it for themselves. As they approached Windsor Castle, Catherine felt the familiar tension of transitioning back into her official role. In a few minutes, she would need to transform from Kate, the mother who had just spent a perfect morning with her children, back into Catherine, the Princess of Wales with responsibilities and protocols and a schedule that extended far beyond personal preferences. But she also felt something she hadn't expected: profound satisfaction. She had given her children something precious and irreplaceable. She had proven to herself that underneath all the royal training and public expectations, they were still a family capable of simple joy and authentic connection. "When we get back," Catherine said as Sarah navigated the final turns toward the castle, "this becomes our special secret. Just the four of us will know about our adventure today." "Will you remember it?" Louis asked, as if their morning might somehow disappear if it wasn't officially recorded. "I will remember every single moment," Catherine promised, and she meant it completely. As Windsor Castle came into view, Catherine felt a mixture of emotions she hadn't anticipated. Relief that they had successfully completed their adventure without incident. Sadness that their brief taste of normalcy was ending. Pride in how beautifully her children had handled their first experience of anonymity. And, most surprisingly, renewed appreciation for certain aspects of their royal life. The contrast with their morning of freedom had highlighted not just the constraints of their usual existence, but also its privileges and purposes. Charlotte and Louis were growing up with opportunities to make positive differences in the world, to represent values of service and dedication, to be part of something larger than themselves. Their royal identity came with responsibilities, but also with the chance to use their platform for meaningful purposes. Still, Catherine knew that today's adventure would stay with her as a reminder of what was possible when expectations were set aside and authentic family connection was prioritized above all else. Sarah pulled into the same service entrance they had used for their departure, and Catherine felt the familiar weight of royal life settling back around her shoulders. In just a few minutes, she would need to account for her morning to her protection officer. She would need to resume the carefully managed schedule of royal duties. She would need to become public again. But, first, she had these final private moments with her children, holding the secret of their perfect adventure close to their hearts. The transformation back to royal life began even before they left Sarah's van. Catherine helped Charlotte and Louis out of their ordinary clothes and back into the designer outfits that marked them unmistakably as members of the royal family. The simple jeans and sweaters that had granted them invisibility were carefully folded and tucked away in a small bag that Catherine would later hide in the back of her private wardrobe. Watching her children change clothes, Catherine was struck by how the transformation involved more than just fabric. Charlotte automatically began to hold herself differently as she put on her proper coat, her posture becoming more formal, her movements more considered. Louis instinctively began speaking more quietly, his natural exuberance tempered by the return to palace protocols. They were becoming royal again, and, while Catherine appreciated the grace with which they made the transition, she also felt a pang of loss for the uninhibited children who had spent the morning exploring a Christmas market with complete freedom. "Remember," Catherine said as she adjusted Charlotte's collar and smoothed Louis's hair back into its usual neat style, "this is our special secret. No one else needs to know about our adventure today." Both children nodded solemnly, understanding the importance of discretion even if they didn't fully grasp why their perfectly innocent morning needed to remain hidden. Sarah embraced each of them goodbye, and Catherine caught her friend's eye with a look of profound gratitude. Sarah had risked her own reputation and, potentially, her freedom to make this adventure possible. If palace security had discovered their unauthorized departure, Sarah could have faced serious consequences for her role in what might have been characterized as kidnapping members of the royal family. "Thank you," Catherine whispered as she hugged Sarah goodbye. "For everything. For understanding why this mattered." "Thank you for letting me be part of it," Sarah replied. Watching them discover what it feels like to be normal children was extraordinary. "I hope they'll remember this forever." "They will," Catherine said with certainty. "And so will I." The walk back through the castle corridors felt different than their exit earlier that morning. Then, Catherine had been moving toward freedom and possibility. Now, she was returning to a world of schedules and expectations and carefully managed appearances. But she was also returning with something precious, the memory of a perfect morning when her family had been exactly who they wanted to be rather than who others expected them to be. As they approached the private family quarters, Catherine's protection officer appeared with the sort of precise timing that suggested he had been monitoring their return. Detective Inspector Thompson was a consummate professional who had been with the family for 3 years, and his expression revealed nothing as he greeted Catherine and the children. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," he said formally. "I trust you had a pleasant morning with the children." Catherine's heart raced, wondering if their absence had somehow been detected despite her careful planning. But Thompson's tone seemed routine, suggesting he believed they had indeed spent the morning reading stories in the nursery as she had indicated. "Very pleasant, thank you," Catherine replied, hoping her voice sounded appropriately casual. "The children and I had some lovely quiet time together." Charlotte and Louis exchanged glances, both of them clearly fascinated by this exercise in diplomatic truth-telling. Their morning had indeed been lovely and they had indeed spent it together, even if the details were rather different from what their protection officer assumed. "Prince William called while you were indisposed," Thompson continued, consulting his ever-present notebook. "He'll be returning from his morning engagements at approximately 2 o'clock. You're scheduled for the Christmas tree selection at 3:30, followed by the children's Christmas photograph session at 4. The return to scheduling felt jarring after their morning of complete spontaneity. Catherine nodded appropriately while privately marveling at how foreign the structured afternoon seemed after just a few hours of freedom. "We'll be ready," she assured Thompson, who retreated to his usual discreet distance. Once they were safely back in the family's private sitting room, Catherine sat down with Charlotte and Louis to process their adventure together. She wanted to understand their experience from their perspective and to help them integrate the morning into their understanding of their unique lives. "What was the most surprising thing about our adventure today?" Catherine asked, settling onto the sofa with both children curled up beside her. Charlotte considered the question seriously. "How easy it was," she said finally. "I thought being normal would be harder to learn, but it just felt natural." Her answer revealed something profound about the artificial nature of royal protocols. For Charlotte, behaving naturally was something she had to learn to do rather than something she could simply be. "What about you, Louis?" Catherine asked. "What surprised you the most?" "The ducks didn't know I was a prince," Louis said with obvious delight. "They just thought I was a boy with bread. And they liked me anyway." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at Louis's innocent revelation. Even at 4 years old, he was beginning to understand that people's reactions to him were often influenced by his title rather than his personality. The duck's indifference to his royal status had been refreshing precisely because it was so rare. "Did it feel different, being just yourselves instead of being royal?" Catherine asked. Both children nodded emphatically. "Better different or just different?" Catherine pressed gently. Charlotte thought carefully before answering. Not better, she said slowly. Just different. Like wearing different clothes. Sometimes you want to wear your fancy dress, and sometimes you want to wear your play clothes. Catherine was impressed by her daughter's mature analysis. Charlotte was developing the emotional intelligence to understand that different situations called for different versions of themselves, and that neither version was inherently superior to the other. Today felt like wearing play clothes for our whole selves, Charlotte continued. Not just our bodies, but our feelings and thoughts too. The metaphor was remarkably sophisticated, and it helped Catherine understand that Charlotte was already learning to navigate the complex emotional terrain of public versus private identity. Lewis's perspective was characteristically more immediate. I liked choosing my own ornament, he declared. And talking to the puppet man. And nobody telling me to stand up straight or speak more clearly or remember to say please and thank you extra politely. Catherine realized that Lewis was becoming aware of the additional layer of performance required in his royal interactions. He understood that his natural politeness needed to be amplified and formalized for public consumption, and today he had enjoyed the relief of simply being ordinarily well-mannered rather than extraordinarily so. Will we ever do something like this again? Charlotte asked, voicing the question Catherine had been dreading. I don't know, Catherine answered honestly. Today was very special partly because it was so unusual. If we did things like this regularly, they wouldn't be adventures anymore. They would just be ordinary. But ordinary felt nice, Lewis pointed out with 4-year-old logic. It did feel nice, Catherine agreed. And that's something important for us to remember. There are beautiful things about both our royal life and our private life. Today helped us appreciate what we love about each one. She was trying to help her children understand their adventure in context rather than viewing it as evidence that their usual life was somehow lacking. Both their public and private identities had value and purpose, and learning to find fulfillment in both would be crucial for their long-term happiness. A knock at the sitting room door interrupted their discussion. Catherine's lady-in-waiting entered with the sort of diplomatic timing that suggested urgent but not catastrophic news. Your Royal Highness, she said with a slight curtsy, I wanted to inform you that there were some questions about your whereabouts this morning. Nothing serious, she added quickly, seeing Catherine's expression, but apparently Prince William tried to call the nursery directly and was told by staff that you and the children weren't there. Catherine's stomach dropped. She had accounted for calls to her personal phone and official inquiries through her protection officer, but she hadn't considered the possibility that William might try to reach her through the nursery staff. What did you tell him? Catherine asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. I explained that you had requested complete privacy for personal time with the children and asked not to be disturbed unless there was an emergency. I suggested that you had perhaps taken them for a walk in the private gardens or found a quiet spot elsewhere in the castle for your morning together. Catherine felt a wave of gratitude for her lady-in-waiting's discretion and quick thinking. The explanation was truthful enough to be believable while providing cover for their actual whereabouts. Thank you for handling that, Catherine said. Did Prince William seem concerned? Not concerned exactly, but perhaps curious about the change in routine. You don't usually request such complete isolation from staff. Catherine realized that her attempts to create cover for their adventure had inadvertently created a different sort of attention. Her unusual behavior had been noticed even if their actual departure hadn't been discovered. I felt the children needed some unstructured time together as a family, Catherine said, which was absolutely true. Sometimes the most precious moments happen when you're not trying to create them. After her lady-in-waiting left, Catherine found herself in the peculiar position of needing to prepare for the afternoon's royal duties while processing the morning's entirely different experience. She needed to shift mentally from the woman who had bought her children hot chocolate and handmade ornaments to the Princess of Wales who would select Christmas trees and pose for official photographs. But she also realized that her morning adventure had enriched rather than undermined her royal role. Seeing her children experience authentic joy and freedom had renewed her appreciation for the importance of preserving their childhood within the constraints of their public lives. Understanding what they longed for would help her advocate more effectively for moments of normalcy within their structured existence. Mummy, Charlotte said as Catherine began preparing them for their afternoon activities, when we do our Christmas photographs today, will you remember our real Christmas morning? I will remember every moment, Catherine promised. And, someday, when you're older, we'll look back on today as one of our most special family memories. Charlotte smiled with satisfaction. Good. Because even though nobody else will know about it, it still really happened. Her daughter's words struck Catherine as profoundly wise. Their adventure had been real and meaningful regardless of whether it would appear in any official record or family biography. The private moments of connection and joy were no less valuable for being invisible to the outside world. As they prepared to rejoin their public lives, Catherine felt a new kind of confidence about the balance between their royal duties and their family identity. She had proven to herself that her children could maintain their authentic selves while fulfilling their public roles. More importantly, she had demonstrated that creating space for private family experiences was not just possible but essential. The afternoon would bring Christmas tree selections and formal photographs and all the traditional elements of a royal holiday celebration. But underneath it all would be the secret knowledge of their perfect ordinary morning, a gift they would carry with them long after the official celebrations were forgotten. Prince William arrived at Windsor Castle precisely at 2 o'clock, as Thompson had predicted. Catherine heard his familiar footsteps in the corridor before he appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, still wearing his morning's formal attire but, with his tie loosened and his expression softened by the prospect of family time. "There you are," he said, settling into his favorite armchair. "I tried to call the nursery earlier to see if you wanted to join me for lunch, but apparently you and the children had vanished into thin air." Catherine felt her heart skip, but managed what she hoped was a casual smile. "We had a lovely quiet morning together. Sometimes it's nice to be completely undisturbed, don't you think?" William studied her face with the sort of attention that came from 15 years of marriage. "You look different," he said slowly. "Relaxed. Happy in a way that's unusual for a morning spent in the castle." Catherine had underestimated how well William knew her. She had planned for external scrutiny but hadn't fully considered how her changed energy might be apparent to someone who knew her so intimately. "Do I?" she asked, buying time while she considered how to respond. Charlotte saved her from immediate explanation by launching into an enthusiastic description of the morning that was carefully edited but genuinely excited. "Mummy let us do whatever we wanted all morning. We read stories and played games and had the most fun conversations." Louis nodded energetically. "And we got to choose things. Like what to play and where to sit and everything." Their excitement was infectious and authentic, even if their description omitted certain geographical details. William's expression softened as he listened to his children's obvious happiness. "That sounds wonderful," he said, though Catherine could see him processing the unusual nature of their enthusiasm. Charlotte and Louis were accustomed to having choices within their daily routines, so their excitement about selection seemed disproportionate unless something else had been different about their morning. "Catherine," William said after the children had finished their recounting, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Catherine's pulse quickened, but she nodded calmly. "Of course. Children, why don't you choose which books you'd like to take to the Christmas tree selection this afternoon?" Once Charlotte and Louis were occupied with their book selection, William moved closer to Catherine, his expression serious but not angry. "What really happened this morning?" he asked quietly. "And please don't tell me you spent 4 hours reading stories in the nursery, because I know you well enough to recognize when you're editing the truth." Catherine realized she was faced with a choice she hadn't fully anticipated. She could maintain her careful fiction and hope William wouldn't press further, or she could trust him with the truth of their adventure. The decision felt weighted with more significance than just this moment. It was about whether their marriage could accommodate her need to occasionally step outside the constraints of their shared public life. "If I tell you the truth," Catherine said slowly, "will you promise to hear me out completely before you react?" William's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Catherine, what exactly did you do?" Taking a deep breath, Catherine told him everything. About her months of planning, about Sarah's van, about the Christmas market in Marlborough, about watching their children experience freedom and anonymity for the first time in their lives. She watched William's face cycle through surprise, alarm, understanding, and something that might have been admiration. When she finished, they sat in silence for several long moments. "You took our children completely off the radar," William said finally. "Without security, without backup, without anyone knowing where you were." "Yes," Catherine admitted, bracing herself for the anger she was certain would follow. Instead, William shook his head slowly. "And they loved every moment of it, didn't they?" Catherine nodded, surprised by his tone. "I can see it in their faces," William continued. "They look like children who've had a genuine adventure rather than a managed experience. Charlotte's practically glowing with confidence, and Louis seems more settled than he's been in weeks." "You're not furious?" Catherine asked cautiously. William considered his words carefully. "I'm terrified retrospectively," he admitted. "The thought of something happening to you three while you were completely unprotected makes me physically ill. But I'm also..." He paused, searching for the right words. "I'm proud of you for finding a way to give them something I didn't think was possible." Catherine felt relief flooding through her. She had been prepared for William to be angry about the security risks, to lecture her about the importance of protocols, to forbid any similar adventures in the future. "I've been watching Charlotte and Louis navigate their royal duties," William said thoughtfully. "They're remarkably good at it, but I've also noticed how carefully they manage themselves during public appearances. This morning, they look like children who forgot to manage themselves at all." "That's exactly what happened," Catherine said. "For 3 hours, they were just Charlotte and Louis. Not royal children, not public figures, just ordinary children exploring a Christmas market with their mother." William was quiet for another long moment. "Tell me about the market," he said finally. Catherine described their adventure in more detail, sharing the moments that had touched her most deeply. Charlotte's delight in choosing her own Christmas ornament. Louis's conversation with the ducks who didn't care about his royal status. The easy interactions with other families who saw them simply as another mother and children enjoying a holiday tradition. "Louis fed ducks?" William asked with a smile. "Without anyone worrying about whether it was appropriate or what message it might send." "He fed ducks because he wanted to feed ducks," Catherine confirmed. "And Charlotte chose a completely imperfect handmade ornament because she thought it was beautiful, not because it had historical significance or educational value." William's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking lately about my own childhood memories. The ones that stand out aren't the state occasions or formal celebrations. They're the moments when Mother managed to create ordinary experiences within our extraordinary circumstances." Catherine hadn't expected this response. She had been prepared to defend her decision, not to discover that William understood her motivations so completely. "But, Catherine," William said, his tone becoming more serious, "you can't do something like this again." "Not exactly like this. The security risks are genuine, and if something had happened..." "I know," Catherine said quickly. "I'm not planning to make a habit of disappearing with the children. But, William, seeing them today showed me how much they need moments when they can just be themselves without any expectations or observations. Then, we need to find safer ways to create those moments," William said firmly. "Because you're right. They do need that. We all need that." Catherine felt a surge of love for her husband that caught her off guard. She had expected him to focus entirely on the risks and protocols she had violated. Instead, he was focusing on the needs she had identified and fulfilled. "What do you have in mind?" Catherine asked. "I don't know yet," William admitted. "But watching our children's faces today has convinced me that we need to be more intentional about preserving their childhood within the constraints of our public lives. Maybe that means finding private spaces where they can be completely unguarded. Maybe it means being more selective about which public events really require their participation." Charlotte appeared beside them, having apparently finished her book selection. "Papa, did Mummy tell you about our secret adventure?" William glanced at Catherine with raised eyebrows. "She told me you had a very special morning together." "We were invisible," Louis announced proudly, joining his sister. "Like superheroes. Nobody knew who we were, so we could do whatever we wanted." "And what did you want to do?" William asked, genuinely curious. Everything, Charlotte said simply. We wanted to look at everything and choose things and talk to people and just be curious about whatever seemed interesting. William's expression grew tender as he listened to his children describe their morning of freedom. That sounds like exactly what children should want to do. Can we do it again sometime? Louis asked hopefully. Not exactly the same, but something where we get to choose and explore and be curious? William looked at Catherine, and she saw understanding pass between them. They would need to find ways to honor their children's need for authentic experiences while maintaining the security and stability that their royal roles required. I think, William said carefully, that we need to plan more adventures where you can be curious and make choices. Maybe not exactly like today's adventure, but opportunities for you to explore and discover things in your own way. Catherine watched as both children's faces lit up with excitement and possibility. They weren't asking to abandon their royal responsibilities or escape their heritage permanently. They were simply asking for regular opportunities to be authentic children within the context of their unique lives. The afternoon proceeded as scheduled, with Christmas tree selection and formal photographs that would appear in newspapers around the world. But Catherine noticed subtle differences in how Charlotte and Louis approached their royal duties. They seemed more confident, more naturally themselves, as if their morning of complete authenticity had reminded them that their public roles were performances they could put on rather than identities that consumed them entirely. During the Christmas tree selection, Charlotte asked thoughtful questions about the different varieties and expressed genuine preferences rather than simply accepting whatever was presented to her. Louis interacted with the garden staff with natural curiosity and friendliness rather than the careful politeness he usually displayed during formal activities. The photographers captured lovely images of a royal family selecting their Christmas tree, but Catherine knew that the most meaningful part of their day would remain invisible to the public. The confidence and joy that radiated from her children during the photo session was the direct result of a morning spent being completely themselves. That evening, after the children were asleep, Catherine and William sat in their private sitting room discussing the long-term implications of the day's revelations. I've been thinking about what you accomplished today, William said, pouring tea from the service that had been left on the side table. You proved something important about our children. What's that? Catherine asked. You proved that they can navigate the ordinary world with grace and kindness when they're not performing for cameras or following protocols. They're genuinely lovely children, not just well-trained royal children. Catherine felt a swell of pride. They were extraordinary today. Natural and polite and curious and just themselves. It makes me think we've been underestimating them, William said thoughtfully. We've been so focused on preparing them for their royal duties that we haven't given them enough credit for their ability to simply be good people in the world. So what do we do with that understanding? Catherine asked. William was quiet for several moments before answering. We become more intentional about creating space for them to be authentic children. Not just during private family time, but in ways that let them engage with the world on their own terms. Without completely compromising security or abandoning our responsibilities, Catherine added. Exactly, William agreed. But, Catherine, today showed me that we need to take those risks sometimes. Calculated risks, planned risks, but real opportunities for our children to experience life beyond palace walls. Catherine felt a deep sense of satisfaction settling over her. Her impulsive plan to give her children one ordinary Christmas morning had revealed possibilities she hadn't fully imagined. More than just a single adventure, it had opened a conversation about how to better balance their children's royal obligations with their fundamental needs as growing, curious, authentic young people. Later that night, as Catherine checked on Charlotte and Louis before retiring, she found Charlotte awake in her bed, staring thoughtfully at the ceiling. "Mommy?" Charlotte whispered. Today felt like the beginning of something. What do you mean, sweetheart? Like we discovered something important about ourselves, Charlotte said with remarkable insight for her age. Like we found out we can be royal and normal at the same time. Catherine smiled in the darkness, realizing that her daughter had articulated exactly what she had hoped to accomplish. I think you're right, she whispered back. Sweet dreams, my love. As Catherine settled into her own bed, she reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from her carefully planned adventure. She had set out to give her children one morning of normalcy, but she had also given them something more valuable: the confidence that they could be authentically themselves while fulfilling their royal roles. Most importantly, she had proven to herself and to William that protecting their children's childhood within the constraints of royal life wasn't just necessary, it was possible. It would require creativity, planning, and occasional calculated risks, but the morning had demonstrated that the benefits far outweighed the challenges. The Princess of Wales closed her eyes, holding close the memory of Charlotte feeding ducks and choosing imperfect ornaments and being just another curious child at a Christmas market. It had been, she knew, one of the most important days of their family's life, even though it would never appear in any official record. Some of the most precious royal moments, she had learned, were the ones that remained beautifully, perfectly invisible to the watching world.